So my business originally started as a solo psychotherapy practice. In 2007, I realized that I really had a passion and could serve a very specific niche. And since then, it's really evolved and grown and had several iterations. I remember early on, I had one therapist that I could call on to help me. There were very few bilingual therapists in Denver. There's also the stigma around receiving mental health services that is just endemic to our culture, and I think specifically in the Latinx culture. One of the things that I always used to tell clients as soon as they would come into my office was, just because you're here, it doesn't mean that you're crazy. Just that statement alone would help people really settle into the process. You're here to get the support that you need to be able to do whatever it is that you want in life. So this idea of being able to not only provide a service that was so needed, but to also be part of this movement to start to eliminate the stigma in our community felt important to me. In 2019, I really wanted to think about how could I start to grow this business in a different way. So the podcast is specifically about successful Black, Indigenous, and women of color who are overcoming trauma and becoming resilient. So I really looked for different people in different industries, executive director roles, CEOs of companies, starting small businesses, in politics. I think representation matters and that I want other people to see me and see other women of color doing something that they didn't know that they could do.
Not everyone understands the issues of people of color. So even though we speak in the same language, they don't understand the themes or they cannot empathize with them.
70% of our listenership is international now. These kind of conversations are happening all across the globe. As a Black man, I wasn't hearing that kind of conversation.
When I'm seeing these themes in my practice, she's normalizing them for me and giving them language for me.
To be able to have a bigger audience, to have a greater impact, is really our vision for the next 3 years. To be out there and be very public is difficult, but I think that that's my growth and that's the learning curve for me. Hey, it's Marisol. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Really quick, I wanted to let you know that we have partnered with U.S. Bank on their mission to power human potential through their Community Possible grant program. This program is dedicated to supporting communities like this one while addressing racial and economic inequities. This could be a great opportunity for you, so click the link in this episode description, learn more, and apply.
Just gonna get it out. It ain't even mine the whole man. Integrity. That. All we got is our word.
Hello, this is Marisol Solarte-Erlacher, psychotherapist and consultant, and this is the Resilience and Resistance Podcast, a podcast about successful Black, Indigenous women of color who have overcome trauma and become resilient. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being the first of our Latina Entrepreneurship Series on the Resilience and Resistance Podcast. I'm really, really glad that you're here.
I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So 99.9% of the people that I have on this podcast I know very intimately. And I've only recently had the opportunity to get to know you. Yeah. So talk a little bit about how we know each other.
So we know each other through the Latino Leadership's LEAP, so entrepreneurial program that we both started, was it August, I think July? Sometime this summer.
Yeah, and so the intent of the LEAP program is to help accelerate BIPOC, Latinx-owned businesses to get to a different level that some of those are Latinx specifically in our case owned companies don't get to. Yeah. What motivated you to actually be part of the program?
Well, I had done some other LLI programs, and then I think just generally I like the idea of looking at entrepreneurship through that Latinx lens, because I do think, first of all, it's nice to commune with other folks in that community, and then also to think about how maybe we're impacted differently than other groups are as part of that framing. So I do like the idea of having that all brought together.
Yeah, and the idea of having people who are advising us in the process that may have a similar experience.
Yeah, that's been really helpful.
Yeah, so the intent, I think, for me to bring you on here is because I think that I imagine for you as an entrepreneur, and myself as well, have a very unique experience and sometimes feel alone in that experience. I think as a woman, as a Latina, and as someone who intent was never to become a small business owner, and had to figure it out along the way, which I imagine you had a similar experience, just thinking about and looking at your journey from the outside.
Yeah.
So tell me about yourself. So you are the co-founder and COO of Inscribe.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about Inscribe.
So Inscribe is an online tool that integrates primarily with schools, also with publisher content, and really the intent is to provide an online community space for students that are learning outside of like a traditional classroom environment. So we used to call them non-traditional students. It feels like most students now are doing at least some of their learning online, and so many students are working parents, working full-time, not parents, and trying to go to school at the same time, doing their coursework in the middle of the night, and they don't have a way to feel either connected to other students in the class, their instructors, the school in general. So what we're trying to do is create online community spaces so they can connect with each other and connect with their instructors and really have a more likely chance of persisting, because they're getting that same support system that traditional, like in-person, face-to-face students would get.
Oh, that's great. So it's the idea of creating more connectedness
Exactly.
within that setting.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell me more about you personally. So I know that you grew up in Colorado.
Yep.
And that you were a teacher
Yes.
at the beginning of your professional journey. But tell me, fill in the blanks for me. Tell me more.
So I grew up here. I'm the youngest of four. Four kids who education was a really big deal for my family. I was a terrible student, really struggled in school. Not, it was the classic, oh, she's got all this ability and what's happening? She's got terrible grades. And I just really disliked school. So all through school, I thought, I could totally do this better. This is ridiculous. Why can't I could be a teacher? And so that was always my goal, just because I hated school so much, which seems not necessarily that intuitive, but I just thought, this shouldn't be this bad. It could be better. It should be better. So I went to college out of state, came back, and wanted to be a high school teacher. I taught in Denver at Lincoln High School and then at George Washington High School. Which parts of it I loved. I loved the student part. I didn't love some of the parents weren't awesome. And really just the amount of work. I was really young, right? 22 through 25.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I was really committed to teaching kids how to write. And what I learned is that buries you in paperwork. And it's very easy to quickly burn out if you're like, we have to write every day, because then you have to grade it every day. And it was just like, it was a lot. So I left teaching and then went and just sort of did weird stuff for a while, and then ended up doing technical training. And just when I was teaching, I did the yearbook, which I had no journalism background. I had no technology background, but it was all on computers. This was like the late 90s. So that was, or mid 90s actually. It was very new and cutting
early.
edge.
Yeah.
And I was really good at the computer part. So then I just got into technology and then eventually found my way into education technology, which was like the perfect fit for me, because I could still have my fingers in education, but then also have the technology part, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
But not a technologist, not like somebody who's coding or building anything, just gets it, understands how it can be used, and sees the applications and things.
Yeah. So having that education background helped you understand the application.
Definitely.
And I imagine the implications of what connectedness means for students who are disconnected from.
For sure. And I think too, one of the things that we like about the online community space is that, in a regular classroom, there's always going to be somebody who raises their hand and asks questions, and then there's going to be 20 other kids who would never raise their hand and ask a question. And so in the online space, if somebody asks a question, they can all see it. They don't have to ask it. They might be more inclined to ask something in writing that they wouldn't ever raise their hand to say in front of a group of people. So it also just makes it easier for people who normally wouldn't speak up or have access to that information to get involved with, you can be passive and still get a ton out of it.
Yeah, to be able to be an observer but engaged in different ways, and to be able to get the information that you need. So having started the company, tell us a little bit more about that. So it seems as though the trajectory was kind of, and I get this, I feel like most of my professional journey is very happenstance. I kind of did this and did that, and people said do this, and I did it, and then ended up here.
Yeah, so it was never on my radar at all.
Yeah. So how did that end up being part of your professional journey? What led to you becoming a co-founder?
It was sort of interesting. The folks that I co-founded with, I'd worked with before. So we all worked at a large publishing company, Pearson Education. They did a lot of online learning. And we were part of a smaller company that was based out of Denver called eCollege that Pearson bought. And so we were in this giant, it's a huge organization at the time. It was 30 or 40,000 people, and it just felt really, really big and not like you could be nimble and do things on your own. So we followed one of our leaders to another company, and it was not as great of an experience. It was a startup. I'm going to use air quotes. It didn't feel like a startup. And it still had like a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of, I felt in my role, I was brought in to lead up their project management and portfolio management team. And I had lots of ideas. I was really excited about it. And I got very much dismissed not by the person who brought me in, but by other folks at the business, where I would say, hey, I'm thinking about these things. And literally mid-meeting, they would say, okay, great, can we be done? Yeah. And I thought, oh, these guys started a company. Yeah. It seems like if these people can do it, and maybe we should start our own thing. So I kind of talked to one of my co-founders who was also there, and we were like, yeah, we should start our own company. And then I just went and started it. And then I told her like the next day, okay, so like I put in articles of incorporation, we're going. And so it was sort of just on a really, just because it was so frustrating to not be able to make any changes and not be able to, not be heard, not be able to be effective. It felt really like the opposite of empowering. And I wanted to do my own thing where we felt like we could work with people we liked, who had the same value system that we had, doing things that we cared about. And it just seemed like almost anyone could do it, which is not true. But back then it was like, how hard can this be?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because as you said that, it sparked something in my mind around getting to a place, and I don't know if this is your experience just personally, and maybe as a Latina, and this piece resonates for me, that you get into these positions where you maybe feel like an imposter in some way. And then you recognize that you see the people sitting around the table and you're like, wait a second. I think I can do that, or I can do it better. Or I actually didn't believe that I should have a seat at this table when I should absolutely be here. Do you feel like that was part of the experience?
That was so much part of it, because I think when I went into that new job, it was a smaller company. I was going to lead up the team. There was a lot of expectation that I would put in, practices and help mold things. And then, so I felt, and I was nervous about that. And then when I got in there, I thought, oh, actually I do know what I'm talking about. And then to have people discount my ideas was incredibly frustrating. And so, because I for sure went in feeling nervous about it. And then yes, when you look around, you think, well, I know what I'm doing, and now they don't think I know what I'm doing, and so now I'm mad. Before I was nervous, and now I'm angry. So I think it was really sort of anger that led me to start my own company, which seems sort of dysfunctional now that I say it out loud, but I do think that was part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably part of our. I think there's a way that anger and our ability to be able to see ourselves in those contexts that help motivate that change, and for us to actually take action. Yes. And as you have been in this process of being a co-founder, I imagine that there are lots of challenges in doing that. Can you speak a little bit to that? What have been the biggest challenges for you in this process?
I think what's been interesting is that when we started this business, my whole company, myself included, really we have a good understanding. I have a really good understanding of our industry and the problem that we're trying to solve, and how technology can help solve that problem. But all the things around running a company, so how do you set up what's the right corporate structure? What's the right tax structure? How do you, if you decide to raise money someday, the tax structure that you started with isn't going to work anymore. So we had to do that, and then also it's like a whole other industry and job learning about like the fundraising landscape. And it's all, again, very similar to a lot of things in life, very much who you know, it seems like. And if you don't have connections, which I don't have connections into that world normally. Nobody in my family started a business. Nobody, there's no like legacy of having done this. It's all trying to figure out who do you talk to, who are you talking to that is actually just paying you lip service, that has no intention and just wasting your time, and who's actually going to help you. There's so much around that that seems like just a big, whole new world that I had no idea anything about.
Absolutely. I think about this a lot in terms of when we probably started around the same time, and having to figure things out on your own and try to figure out the landscape. And I think people are at an advantage now because there's so many resources. Like the idea, I know for myself, like when I started my private practice, there was not this idea of being a business owner and a clinician. There wasn't really a lot of content or understanding, or I couldn't conceptualize it for myself. And now it's just like there's so many young women and young therapists who are doing it. But I think that process of being challenged with, how do I even know how to do this? How do I figure it out? And really and truly, it really is about the network that you create. And I think particularly for you, as early as you started in tech, I imagine that was a challenge in itself in terms of trying to figure out how to be who you were in that setting. How would you say that like being a Latina in the tech industry has been?
It's been lonely. There aren't a lot of, I would definitely say my experience in my entire professional career has been very much it's me. Maybe one or two other folks, or in a giant organization, there will always be another Ana Hernandez. There will always be. But when
you Google Ana Hernandez, there's going to be another one.
And there's always one in there, but we never see each other. We never work in the same offices, and it's very, especially in tech. In my experience, was very white male, very much. There were very few women, and then almost none of Latinas, or Latinos, frankly. There were like a couple of us in the office, and that was fun, and everyone would ask. We both had the same last name, so everyone assumed we were related. It's like, oh.
Of course.
No, there are millions of us. It's fine. So, it's definitely, I do not blend in.
Yeah. So thinking about this idea of funding, because I think that especially for small business owners, BIPOC small business owners, Latinx small business owners, funding is an issue. I think through traditional lenders, I think through, like you said, sometimes it's about how do we actually leverage the resources that we have in our community through our families. Some of those resources just aren't available to us, and people don't know how to do fundraising. How has that process been for you? Because in preparing for our time together, I was doing some research, and I think I told you that they said like Latino, and I imagine Latino-owned firms, tech firms, probably get about maybe 1% of venture capital funding, and that's probably generous. If you're looking at the numbers and you're thinking about the mass of and I don't even know where that data came from. But talk to me about that process, because I imagine that for any Latino in tech who is thinking about starting a company, I imagine that is a scary process.
I would say that's definitely been the experience that we've had. And I do know, that there's also data around that, Latinas are less likely to go after traditional forms of funding, including this kind of thing. And some of that, I think, is self-reliance. We'll just figure this out. And some of it is that network. How do you find these people? And a lot of the people giving you money are traditional, like, investors that are looking at, you must have this kind of multiplier on your business. And I think a lot of times, in our case, too, we are not only a women and Latina-owned business, but we're also in a social venture, like a social impact space. So we're looking more social venture capital, where they're like more likely to be interested in a company that, education is never going to be, there's no like Uber of education.
Right,
I don't care if
exactly.
people say they're the Uber
Yeah.
of education. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So finding people that are interested in, you know, the impact that you're trying to make. And then also just, I mean, I have to say it is true that, I mean, 99% of the time that we're pitching something, we're the only women in the room.
Yeah.
And, you know, unless it is an event aimed at women, it's us.
Yeah.
So that's been,
I mean, I imagine I think from my perspective, I would imagine there's a fear and intimidation factor that goes into that. Like, what is it? How that would be a challenge. But
Yeah.
what helps you in those moments of, you know, being? Just the idea. I think
Yeah.
the self-reliance piece, I think, is a big part.
Right.
Because for me, it's. I think, and even being in. Even previous to the LEAP program, as I've been thinking about, you know, getting some advisement around taking out a business line of credit or getting a small business loan.
Right.
And those things in themselves, although they are fundamental to
Right.
scaling your business, are terrifying
Yeah.
to me. So I imagine this idea of bringing money in and then, like you said, being the only Latina and the only woman in the room
Right.
would, I think, bring a level of, and maybe this is my projection onto you,
no.
but what helps you in those moments? Like, what are the factors that really help you get through that?
I think I'm really committed to the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I really believe that what we're doing around connecting students to each other and to their schools is going to make them more successful. I feel like if you go into any environment and you're alone, it's hard. That's like us going to pitch an investor. It's, you know, a student trying to go to school when maybe they're the first one in their family or they're trying to work at the same time. Like anytime you can have some support, that helps. So like going into those rooms knowing that this is what we're trying to do and there are people who work for us that we love and we want them to continue to have this opportunity as well, and that we're impacting so many students that it really keeps you doing it even when it's sometimes not that fun. Like that part's not my favorite part.
Yeah.
But unfortunately I have a great co-founder, Katie, who does a lot of the heavy lifting on that. But
Yeah.
and you know, it's funny, we've received interesting advice because we also have a male co-founder and we've gotten advice from other women that say you need to trot him out more because you have a man on your, you know, and it's just so like, first of all, he doesn't want to. Second of all, we shouldn't have to.
You shouldn't have to. Right.
But we have heard that more than once, that you need to have him more present in the room if you want to get these kinds of things. And it's just so discouraging.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think that too, that it be part of this idea of, like you said, the passion and the investment and how much you believe in the vision and the mission of the company. I think those are such great motivators. What motivates you to be an entrepreneur? Because I've been thinking a lot about this in my own life, and I think that there's a special composition of personality or character or that leads you into entrepreneurship, but also keeps you in it. Because I know for myself, there are some days where I wake up and I'm like, what am I doing?
I'm so tired.
Why am I doing this again? And so I think it's always good to ground yourself in the values and the reason, your why of why you're doing it. But what for you keeps you in it? Because I know that for me, there are some days where I'm like, I think that maybe a 9-to-5 job would be nice.
Yeah. I think I like to prove people wrong. I don't know that that's the healthiest motivator, but I like to prove, and one of those people being myself, because I definitely have a lot of self-doubt. And I want to do things that I think either I can't do, like I think I can't do it, or maybe other people have thought, like, I cannot ever imagine Anna doing something like this.
Yeah.
So I have felt that. I know other people have felt that as well. I'm not naturally a big risk taker. I think my sister and I talk about this a lot. We did not grow up with a lot. And so employment-wise, we're always pretty risk averse. Like we want stable income where we don't have to worry about it. And so this for me is such a huge departure from like just wanting to make sure that everything is stable and that I don't have to worry about. That is the opposite of the experience in my entrepreneurial journey, where sometimes everything is amazing and sometimes it's just so bleak.
Yeah, and you're like, how am I going to eat tomorrow?
Right. Yeah. So, but I do like the idea of challenging myself to do a thing. And then also, I think a couple things. One, I think it's great. I have a 12-year-old son. I think it's so important for him to see that mom is doing something like this. So he just thinks women run companies. Like he just thinks that's the norm, and that's, which I think is fantastic. That's just what he thinks. And I also just want to be a Latina out there doing that and just trying to make those numbers better. Like, no, look, so many of us are running successful companies, and have it be, you know, somebody can look and if they ever run across me, they know there's a Latina that has run a business, and, you know, I can help and all of those things. So
yeah, I love that you say that, because I think that that's so important to me, and one of my whys is this idea of representation. And, you know, I think that there are lots of different thoughts about what representation means, but I think this idea of being seen and having to be public and having to challenge ourselves to be at those meetings, to ask for the funding, to be in the rooms that we maybe historically have not been in, is important, and important for other people to see that they can do it. In terms of, like, I think for Latinas in tech, what, for a Latina out there who's thinking about starting a business, thinking about founding something, what advice would you give them? What would you want them to know?
I think that you know more than you think you know. I think that trusting your own abilities is so hard. And I would imagine that we all know more than we think we know. I think all the time I'm, you know, as a new business owner, I'm sure you had this experience as well. We talked about it a little bit already. You're constantly running into things that you've never done before, but that doesn't mean you can't. And that doesn't mean that the experiences that you have, you know, in your profession or whatever aren't going to also help fill in those gaps that you don't know. So I think just really trusting that if you've gotten, you know, from A to B, you can get to C and D. It's just all about pushing yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone. You know, it's not even faking it till you make it. It's just, you're not even faking it. Like, you think you're faking it, but you're not. You have a lot more ability than you think you do.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And it's so true that this idea of getting from A to B, you know, I think that I've taken notes over the course of my journey as a professional, and, you know, what are in terms of my goals, like what are the things that I've desired at certain times in my life, and I've gone back, and it's almost comical to think about, like, oh my gosh, if I could just make X amount of money, if I could just do this one thing, if I could just have this many clients, whatever it was, whatever the goal was in that moment, that felt so overwhelming and like impossible. And I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm, you know, at like EF, you know, in terms of where I am now in my journey, and I never thought I would be. But I think that point around being able to trust yourself and know that you know more than you think, and that the things that seem impossible are probably much more possible than you actually believe. And I think probably for us, you know, I think because we have similar intentions in terms of reasons why we do this work, is that the more that we personally are able to push ourselves, and professionally, I mean, obviously in this context professionally, but I think part of the entrepreneurship journey is really personal. I think that it really is about personal growth and about challenging the limitations that you believe that you have. But I think thinking about professionally for us and being able to be representative in our fields or whatever it is that we desire to do, this idea of continuing to believe in ourselves and to believe that we can do more than we thought possible is so important. Because then we're able to give that example and then be able to look behind and say, here are the things that I didn't know. That can accelerate your process.
Well, I think, you know, when you say that you were writing things down the whole time along, you weren't writing necessarily what today would look like. You were just writing the next step. And I think it's so easy to get stuck in, how am I going to build this giant tower, when really all you need to do is like get a step. You know, like it's just, if you break it down into small enough pieces, even if you don't do that consciously, I can't, you know, we joke all the time, I can't believe like we're still in business. I mean, not in a bad way, you know, not like, but it's just shocking when you think about the statistics of how many new businesses go out in the first 2 years. And then we're like 8 years in, and it just seems crazy that we're running a business, and that's fine. Like I'm a real grown up with a business and people on a payroll, and it's like, it's the whole thing. And how did I get here? It's just really, but if you just don't think about, it's not that we have no visions or anything, but if you're not thinking about like all the things that could make it impossible, you would just never start. It's just not possible. It's not, I run a lot of marathons too. I'm running a marathon next week, and it's not like you run 20 miles the first week of training, you run 20 miles like 20 weeks into training. And it's the same thing with starting a business. You just have to like do the small things, and then eventually it becomes a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've run marathons in the past. And so for me, mentally, it's always about how do I get to the next mile? How do I get to the next mile? It's never thinking about the end, the finish line. I just have to get to that. And then I might cry on that mile, but that's okay.
I might cry in 2 more miles too.
And then I may be regretful, deeply regretful that I ever thought about doing that.
For sure, gonna run through that at some point.
I always use, I did a run called the Trans Rockies Run. Don't do it, people. Don't. It's it's not worth it.
Done. No problem.
It's a 6-day race.
Oh man.
And I always tell the story about the race where I got to a point where mentally all I could do was think of the next aid station, because you know we had to run almost a marathon in the mountains every day, and I would just think about like if I get to the next aid station, I'm going to be okay. And the last aid station, I knew I had 3 miles, and I only had 3 miles in me left. That was it. And they had a sign that said 5 miles to go. Because they would move the finish line, and I was like, I had a mental breakdown. I'm sorry to my running partner at the time.
I apologize.
But I think that, to your point, you know, and it's so. I think it sometimes I think for myself it's so cliche to think about races and running and training as, you know, a metaphor for business or for life, but it really is about having these moments. I know for myself mentally where I think, can I keep doing this? Like, is this sustainable, or am I going to make it through this recession? Am I going to make it, you know, will I be here in 10 years, and what will that look like? I think just getting to the next thing is so valuable, because I think mentally it helps us know that the next thing isn't going to be as challenging. We just have to, you know, it really becomes a mental game a lot of the time.
Yeah, and you can remind yourself of all the things you've already done, right? So it's like, well, I've already done that.
Right.
And so if I did that, I can probably do this. And if we survived COVID, we'll survive whatever this next one is. We don't know that's coming. You know, like whatever that is, you always can think, well, we did that. We figured that out. I know how to do that. So this is just another thing I have to figure out. And then I can, you know, as long as you're thinking of just exactly what you said, just that next thing, you know that the end is, you want the end, but you have to just get through each thing as it comes.
Yeah. So part of this podcast, and obviously this is a little bit different since we're doing this series and we're really focused on entrepreneurship among Latinas and Latina founders, I want to know from you what resilience means to you as an entrepreneur. So, I mean, obviously we've spoken a little bit to it in terms of just getting to the next thing, but when you think about this idea of being resilient, because just in your story and just knowing you and sitting with you, I mean, obviously you have so much resilience. What does that mean for you in this entrepreneurial journey?
I think it means, that's a good question, how to explain it. I think for me, resilience is really about staying the course. So knowing that leaning into that idea that what I'm doing matters, and the people that I am doing it with matter. And so whatever hard thing that I'm in the middle of, if I keep that sort of grounding in mind, that I care about the people that we're serving, I care about the people that I work with, I can keep moving. We can keep going, even though there are mornings that you're just, I've been there. Boy, a 9 to 5 would be great. I could just work for someone and they would go out and and I could just get paid. And
just that money rolls right into my checking
account. I don't
account.
even know how that gets there. I just do work and then money comes. But I think just keeping in mind that I really care about what I'm doing and I really care about who I'm doing it with, just keeps me going forward and keeps me really centered on making sure that I'm staying the course.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today. I'm so excited that we're able to do this together, and I'm really excited to continue. I'm able to be on this journey with you through the LEAP program and, you know, having some entrepreneurial support along the way. So thank you so much for
Thank you
being
for having me.
with us.
This was really fun.
Yeah.
Just gonna get it out. It ain't even mine to hold, man. Integrity, that.